Kyle, how's it going?
I'm doing well. How about yourself, Pete?
I'm hanging in there, man. I'm so pumped to be talking with you today. Everyone, thank you for joining us for another session here at the Modern Sales Pros Sales Fever Virtual Revenue Excellence Summit. Kyle is obviously a practitioner of Sales Fever. As folks, Sales Love, Sales Fever is
Uncurably designated as such.
yeah.
And by the
Sales
way, the design of these things keeps getting better and better and better. And today is a dialogue, in fact. So I'm excited about that. I don't know if I've had an online dialogue yet.
It's just you, me, and was it Plato or Socrates? I forget who had the dialogues. We're like having a dialogue about sales love, and what have you.
Perfect.
Well, anyway, everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Pete Kazianji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. Atrium makes a AI sales management solution that helps sales organizations improve the performance of their teams using AI and metrics. Prior to Atrium, I started a recruiting software company called Talentbin that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. And then subsequent to that, wrote a book on early stage sales called Founding Sales and started this little thing called Modern Sales Pro. So that's a little bit on me. Need to
Hell of a
update that.
resume, my friend.
Gracias. I want to introduce to everybody our friend here at Modern Sales Pros, Kyle Porter, who is one of the founders of Salesloft. Kyle, maybe you can kind of give folks a little bit of a background on what you did before Salesloft, and of course, what Salesloft does for people who, I don't know, have been in a coma for 10 years or something like that. And then we can kind of get into the topics that we're going to be covering.
Yeah, sure. Well, glad to be here. Thanks for having me. I think this is the first time I've been on where my title was not CEO. So it's new for me to see that down there, but excited to be with you all. I'm the founder and former CEO of Salesloft, and I think I've been in sales since I was a kid, going back to Beanie Babies and baseball cards and comic books and all that.
And Olympics pins.
Olympic pins, lapel pins. Yes, I still have a whole art piece of them that maybe I'll pull out for one of these. But I've just been in love with sales my whole life, been an entrepreneur my whole life. In 2011, started Salesloft, and from the very beginning, really had a mission to deliver sellers with an incredible experience and way for them to connect with their buyers. Help them to be more authentic, help them to be more metrics driven, process oriented. That led to sales engagement as a category that we have been pushing and driving and really riding the wave of. And, really we've expanded to be a all-encompassing sales performance and engagement solution that crosses the gamut from a number of different, ways for you to connect with your buyers, deliver them an awesome experience, drive more revenue.
Yeah. And so now, you guys have a new CEO over there, David O'Brien. Did I pronounce that correctly?
That's right, David O'Brien.
Yeah, David O'Brien, previously of Yammer and a number of other companies as well. So, what are you spending your time doing these days? I mean, the tan looks good, but it kind of usually always does. So, I'm not sure.
Well, not in the early days of Salesloft. It took some time to get out there in the sunlight, but we're couldn't be more thrilled to have David on board as a CEO. He is incredible in so many different ways, and better than me in the most important ways of where this company is on the journey and where the category is today. So, shout out to David and gratitude. I get the privilege of having a weekly meeting with him. So that's our Mondays. We get a weekly meeting. I'm on the board. And I spend time with other other executives on the team. And then I spend time with customers and sometimes get to do fun things with customers, like go to golf tournaments and go out to fun dinners and things like that. So, all in all.
And that's why the tan is so good. It's all those customer golfing outings.
That's right. Yeah. But, my mind never stops working as it relates to how to be better at sales and how teams can perform in the highest levels. And so I think we're going to talk about some of that stuff today.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think you and I, gosh, I don't know when you first initially kind of like pitched me on this concept, but I thought it was absolutely fantastic. But Kyle's always thinking, but then always thinking about how to make sales better, how to make it more effective. And I really like how you frame that about like helping buyers and sellers connect better. Because like that's what we do as sellers. Like a lot of people who are like less familiar with sales, they think like what sales is about is like shoving a product like down someone's throat versus like alignment, right? Or like discovery, like helping like
Understanding. Yeah.
opening someone's eyes to something that they maybe not didn't think about before, maybe that they didn't understand that they had this problem, or maybe they understood they had the problem but they didn't know what was available to solve it and what have you. And all that's like education and alignment and so on and so forth. And I remember you talking about this concept of like a living sales deck, or like was kind of one phrase that you used for it, or like continuous discovery, which I really like continuous discovery because it kind of makes it sound like it's kind of like software, right? Like continuous deployment and also kind of like ongoing. And so like maybe what you could do is kind of share with folks a little bit about this, like this idea and like how you've implemented some of these concepts, and we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, well, and I have to give you a shout out and gratitude because at the beginning, the only people that believed in this idea were you and Jeremy Donovan. And then I started putting it to work and everybody else became a subscriber, at least on my team. And so I had to, kind of break some glass to get this thing out there. But, one caveat I'll go ahead and put out there is that this is for multi-touch and really enterprise type sales. So where you're interacting with the team that you're selling to a good number of times before you get to a final deal. And, sure. and what I'll tell you is that, enterprises, we all know, they have buying committees and they have multiple people that weigh in different ways. And they may have one ultimate decision maker, but that person's leaning on a bunch of folks' inputs to, sway their decision. Right. And so that's really what we found ourselves in when we started to make the move upstream into enterprise sales at Salesloft.
Totally.
And I'll go back to a conversation that I had with Bill Bench, who we all know is the, founding CRO at Marketo, now a partner at Battery. But Bill told me on the phone, he said, it's going to take a lot longer and be a lot more difficult to make this transition upstream. And, we hear that before, like when you start a company, they always say it's going to cost more money, it's going to take more time, and it's going to be more difficult. And the correct answer is always, yeah, for everyone else, but not for me. Right. And
obviously
that's exactly what I told Bill Bench. I get it. It was hard for you and everyone else, but we're different. I'm different, but we ran into a buzzsaw of enterprise sales. And this is one of the ways that we got out of it with, really delivering great results. And the whole concept started with let's call it a Fortune 50 company that we were selling into. Won't name the name today. But we started selling into them. And I go, I'm going to put this theory to test, and I'm going to go out and help the rep to implement this continuous discovery or living sales deck. And so we spent some time gathering information from low-level entry-level people inside the organization, almost just like a straight-up survey, right? You think about how Gartner runs a survey and may give you a free gift card or something for filling out some information. We gathered some information from frontline people that we thought could give us some data, and then we put together a deck. And the deck was for the next tier of individual that we were going to connect with. And at the very beginning, it said, their name, and it had the people that we had already talked to and the quotes of what they had already said as it related to on our end sales engagement and the challenges they were facing with their sales process, right?
Yep.
So it's people they know inside the organization, faces, names, and quotes. And the next thing is the org chart listed as the org chart as we know it, right? We're 100% sure we're going to get this wrong somewhere, right? So here's the org chart
on purpose
as we know it, right? This is our and then immediately it's what do we get right, what do we get wrong, right? That's the part that you're putting in the discussion. And then the next one was the tech stack that they had as we know it, right? So we got people talking about the problems. We've got the organization that we, our hypothesis of what the organization looks like, our hypothesis of what their environment looks like. And then we say, here's what we think you might have in terms of problems. Yep. And again, those are kind of like taking the information we got from the front line, extrapolating what we've heard in the market, seeing how we served other companies. Here's the problems we think you might be having. Here's and kind of right back to spin, right? Here's the implications of those problems. And, here's what we think and hypothesize we might be able to do for you, but we don't know until we fill out more of this information, right? And that's the deck. That's the day one deck, right? So we get on the call with the mid-level executive and we start going through all this information. And the whole time the executive's stopping us going, actually, Tim's no longer in this role. And we hired this person, and we're moving it in the deck as we speak, or we're adding. So the deck is changing with this information, and the buyer is like feeling kind of like rewarded with their input because they're seeing us take action on it, right? Oh, we no longer have that data solution in our tech stack. We just signed with this one, or this one rolls up in 6 months and we're not sure if we're going to, okay, boom. All this is being added in. How do these problems relate? Okay. This one makes sense to me. You might have to talk to David about this one. You might have to talk to Margaret about that one. So we're getting all this information and we're getting next steps in that process. So we get their feedback, their quotes, and boom, now we're going to, and this is always tough. Like, right, you go from the mid-level up to the next level. And, really what you're doing is you're establishing to that person that the trust that you can solve their problems and help them out. But in order to do that, you need access up the chain inside the company so that you can get more momentum to ultimately do that and serve their, So we go to the next person. By the time we get to the president of this organization, we go in this deck and it is glorious. I mean, it's got like systems built by the company, right? It's got timelines. It's got pricing estimates. It's got ROI expectations. And then that executive is like, you got all this, right? Here's a couple tweaks. You got all this. Here's a couple tweaks, right? And then here's the next, and I got next steps. Here's what I want to do. I want to meet security for this approval. I want to meet procurement for this. I want to meet IT for this. Here's the person's name. Here's the date we already have set up, or we don't have it set up yet. And so what happens is this deck just really becomes something that they're super familiar with. And it really goes back to this idea that as an executive, if you're selling and you call me and you tell me something that I don't know about my business that's really important, you're going to have my attention.
Yep.
And if you show me that you've done the research, you've connected with the people, you've gathered what's unique and special about this company, and you've distilled it in a way that's easy for me to take next steps and help out, then that's where you get to the gold mine. So that's really the idea of a living sales deck or a continuous discovery deck.
Yeah, I love this, and there's so many things I want to jump into here. One of my favorite, so Kyle is my sales spirit animal, and so he teaches me. He introduced me to Zig Ziglar, a number of other things as well. And so one of the, I think, a great kind of like watchword there, one of my favorite kind of sales quotes is like, you can get everything you want in life as long as you help other people get what they want. And in this case, so if you just take that and you think about that, like that president or that CRO or whatever, what does that president or that CRO really want to, like, what do they want? And like, they want to know things that are going on in the organization. They want to know defects. They want to know improvement areas and things like that. And that's literally what you're doing here. And like, I was talking to the leader,
especially if it's aligned to a strategic objective of that executive.
Exactly.
Right? So you got to get make that alignment clear throughout that process. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that as relates to like 10Ks in a second here. But I was having this conversation with Nick Mehta, CEO of Gainsight, recently, where we were talking about engaging with another Vista company, engaging with leaders, like when a new leader shows up, and as a CSM, you want to show up and like, they want to take a meeting with you, like they need another hole in their head. But if you can show up and say, hey, I can like use, Atrium here as an example, because we know a lot about the totality of the performance within an organization, right? Because like we know what initiatives the organization has been working on, how different teams have been performing metrically with respect to performance, and all that's cataloged from a CS standpoint in what we call CS plays. If you can show up when that new CRO comes into seat, or if that new VP of sales ops, they're super stoked on it. And so what you're doing right here in your discussion is you're kind of like manufacturing new knowledge that oftentimes that CRO, when a new CRO shows up, maybe they'll go on a listening tour, but like now when they're not going to do that like every quarter for and so if you've gone and done a listening tour and an aggregation exercise for like on this specific topic, right? Like, so obviously like you have an interest in this, like this is like you have skin in the game, that's going to be very, very useful for them. I think the notion of alignment with a like key initiative is a really interesting concept, because one of the things that like in kind of true enterprise sales, organizations publish their 10Ks. I think I'm saying the right there's so many different forms, but they
Yeah.
publish their 10K and they say, hey, here are the things, here are our strategic risks, and here are the things that we're thinking about. But they can only talk about so many of those things in there. And so what you're doing here is you're generating new information. And like if you were to aggregate up all the amount of time that was spent in all those different meetings, and then like maybe put like $1,000 an hour, right, or price tag on that, I imagine the information asset that's being manufactured here is like tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars of research. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a dossier of value, right? You talk about that CSM example. It's like, you know, we're going to speed up your onboarding time to understand this business with a bunch of information that you didn't distill a research team to go get. We did it for you, right? If this executive at this Fortune 50 company had hired McKinsey or some, you know, really expensive consultant to go do a deep dive and analyze all their systems and people and come back with a report, like we're getting close to delivering that report to them, right? And so it just shortcuts a lot of hard work, and it makes business sense. And, you know, someone once told me that PowerPoint was the language of executives, you know, whether it's PowerPoint or something else, right? But, you know, some other type of slideshow. But it really is true, because you can quickly get them up to speed on something. You can showcase a lot of knowledge and capabilities. And you can also showcase to them that you're different as a provider, right? And that's a big, big part of it. At the end of the day, like they ended up trusting me and Salesloft because of our approach and because of the things we uncovered in that approach and because of how we could solve for those things. But it was, you know, each of those was equal in that process.
Yeah, I remember having I was having dinner. It was at a Salesloft dinner. It was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But I was sitting with Jeremy Donovan, and we were talking about enterprise sales, and we were specifically talking about, you know, mutual plans. And the funny thing is, like, people talk about mutual plan software, mutual plans or mutual plan software, but and they more think about it from a checkbox standpoint as opposed to this dossier.
Yeah.
Right, this like asset, this accretion. And one of the things I remember Jeremy kind of sharing with me at the time is he was like, yeah, you know, we're doing really well from an enterprise win rate standpoint. And I think the reason why is because as you go up market, and this is hard for all of us who are nerds who really like software, really like product, and really like features and what have you, to really kind of wrap our minds around, is as you get higher and higher up in these larger organizations, they're buying an outcome, right?
Yeah.
They're not really like they're
And a
buying a
relationship to
partnership.
help drive it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They're buying a relationship, and so what they're doing is it's almost like an audition, or like there's like dating going on, because like they don't want to buy you for like a year and then churn it. They're like, oh man, this is such a pain in the ass. I hope we keep this off for at least a decade,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Well, I
And
mean,
so I
with
think
some software like CPQ and other solutions, it might take a year to implement, you know?
right, and I think that's an important thing here is that how you're demonstrating to the organization that like you're in it for
Yeah.
the long term here. I think I wonder, what's kind of interesting about this is like you can see a bunch of benefit from the standpoint of the seller. I wonder how you get how you get these other executives to participate, because they're all like really busy, right? Or they may not
Yeah.
perceive that there's a problem, or maybe the problem puts them in a negative light or what
Yeah.
have you. I wonder, like, yeah, the multi-threading component of this, how does it like help with that? What are the fine pointers on that? Like, what are the pains with that, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're doing is you're kind of you're recruiting a champion in the organization. And when you're recruiting that champion, you're basically coming to them saying, "Hey, I know a bunch of stuff about the organization. You might not even know all this stuff. I'd like to present it to you." Right?
Yep.
So the things I've gathered about your company, I'd like to present that to you. And then I'd like to align with you on the direction we're going so that I understand the things that will help you through this process to, you know, make more impact in your company, advance within your role, right? Be right for promotions and, you know, next steps, those sorts of things. So you're really, you know, you're using it first and foremost to kind of get to somebody who can then help you. You can both help to navigate the rest of the organization.
Yeah, and I think this is something, and like I'll totally cop to this. like probably the largest deal I've ever sold is like a 75K deal. So like I'm not a big kid enterprise seller. It's not like, I'm no Kevin Walkup, right? Um, but like when you get up into these like larger, 100, 500, I remember like talking with Matt Cameron at one point. He was telling me about these EDS deals he was selling in Australia and Australia, New Zealand, were like multi-million dollar deals.
Yeah.
That like I think what you're describing is exactly right. Like you're trying to find someone who's going to be your Moses, or you're going to be your fullback there, and it's oftentimes like political, right? Where like there could be someone else who like doesn't want to get exposed about the fact that there's this problem, right? The like the board, the shareholders, like they're just in the like they just want higher performance of the organization. But then you have these other players within that organization who may have like misalignment
Yeah.
between their
Oh yeah.
interests and the organization interests. And so what you want to like, you're kind of gathering this information about like what's true in the organization, and then trying to find the person who A, believes you, and then B, has like a personal incentive and a personal interest in helping you run that football. And that might actually involve like that person and you, and then a team around them with this like dossier of truth. And you might actually have to run over this other team within the organization. But like that's just
Yeah.
kind of the
Well,
nature of like big
we've
kid
been in
sales.
scenarios where the president of the organization wanted us, has over $1 billion budget, but it still has to battle IT security, right? It can't just tell IT security what's up. Like literally there's like an actual thing that has to happen there, right? And so we're coming in as a weapon for the president
Yeah,
to get
exactly.
this to happen inside the company, right? Or another scenario where there's another CRO who wants this completely in, but the CEO has harebrained ideas that one day they're going to build what we do. One day down the road. And so from that perspective, they shouldn't be buying it because they're going to build it internally, right? Like this is the kind of thing that, we've run into, and now you're navigating that specific to the point where now the head of product is on the call, digging in to learn exactly what we're doing, and then telling us what they're planning on doing so that we can show them that it's not the same, or it's not going to be the same, right? So
Yeah.
there's some crazy things that happen at the enterprise level where, you think someone has the power, but they ultimately, have to check some other box also.
Yeah, I really love this. And like, I mean, I think the interesting thing about you kind of touched on it as relates to like, oh, you go and you hire McKinsey, right? And this is kind of reminiscent of where kind of partner go to market sometimes show up, where, maybe Deloitte or Accenture or like, Blue Wolf or like fill in the blank, right? Like some big SI. Ideally they're doing this sort of behavior, but maybe they don't have a practice in
Yeah.
what like you're kind of to quote Chamath, like you're below their line, right? And like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
they're not going to have a practice in Salesloft yet, or they're not
Because
going
your
to have an
integration doesn't
atrium.
cost enough.
Yeah, exactly. Like you don't drag enough like professional service hours along with them. So
Yeah,
sorry, right?
exactly.
Like you need to make your software harder to implement.
Yeah.
But the behaviors that those folks do, like Accenture, like sales consulting, or like HR HR optimization consulting or whatever, like the behaviors that they do, your enterprise sellers can mimic that,
That's right.
right? And then one of the phrases I like to when when I do sessions with early stage companies around like founder selling, what have you, it's a salesperson is like a consultant. A technology salesperson is like a consultant that happens to have a predilection for like a specific solution. Now, of course, we're not selling ice to Eskimos here, like shoving round pegs in square holes or whatever. We have a predilection. Like we're not going to try to hang something on you. Of course, you're not going to do
Well,
that
because
in
we don't want to
in
waste our time.
enterprise. We don't want to waste our time. And guess what? If like they don't get value, they're just going to churn, and they're going to tell everybody that you suck anyway. So like let's just not even go down that
Yeah.
path. But if we are doing this continuous discovery and we're like, man, and we're building this case, and we're like, man, like, and like you're just getting this, it's like the Pied Piper, right? Getting all these like people behind you who are like super pumped up and see kind of the vision. And one of the things our board members, Brett Queener, who is a leader at Salesforce for a long time, likes to talk about is like you're building a movement. But in this case, it's like you're building a movement. There's like a market movement, like Dreamforce or Salesloft or whatever, and then there in this case, it's like we're building a movement within this organization. To get to the future. I just think this is really really fantastic. Before we kind of move on, anything else you wanted to add on this, Kyle? Kind of like results that you've seen or what have you?
I think the human element of them seeing how you work, right? That idea of like updating the deck live, coming back and saying, last time we spoke, we thought this, we learned this, so now we know this. Like that kind of them watching you process them, as your target. I think that actually also gives a lot of credence to the way you think, the way you work, how smart you are, how caring, how much you care about,
it's an audition.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. It's like an audition, like fill in the blank, audition, dating, hiring, all
Remember
these
Mark Suster, lines, not dots, right?
Right.
Mark Suster wants to tabulate the dots of startups that come and pitch to him over time and connections that they've had, and creates that line. And like, by the time I step in and ask for the order at the end, I'm a line of 100 dots, And
yeah, exactly. Like I trust these guys. They show up like every time after every meeting. There's an incremental slide that's been added. All the homework's been done, et cetera, et cetera. They're very thoughtful.
And there's this one, like people talk about a lot about like, how do I earn the trust of my buyers? And the way to earn trust is to commit to doing something and doing it. All right. So you go, hey, we got this information. We got this information. We're going to go out and do X, and we'll be back and report on what we found. Right. Or we'll be back to give you those, details. Right. And so now you make a bunch of mini commitments along the way and over deliver on every one each time. And so you've built that, repetition.
This is somebody who I want to be in business with.
Because you can trust them.
Yeah, that's what you want. That's fantastic. Well, Kyle, I think it's a really cool idea, and I don't know who knows. Maybe it turns into software. Maybe
me and Jeremy had thought about it a lot. The front end is tough because you want to come into your first interaction with them with some information, right? Like we found this out from your reps, or we found this out from your frontline, or we searched your G2 and found this out, or your Glassdoor, whatever it is. Like you want to gather some good intel on those very first meetings. So you're like, yep, I'm coming with something of value day one, right? And so can you automate a lot of that capture? I bet you can. Yeah, and then can you throw that into a deck and have the deck have like variable fields and update on its own based on information it gleans? I'm sure you can do some of that.
Like where's, especially now with like large language models, like, hey, here, like we parsed all your G2 reviews. Here's what we saw. Hey, went through your last 8, 10Ks. Here's what we saw, etc. I love it. Oh, totally. As I told everyone, always thinking this guy, look out. Well, so I think one thing, kind of like in the last bit of time that we have here, I think one of the things that you kind of noted earlier is Salesloft and kind of like the digital selling kind of space in general has, like, at this point, sales engagement is like a fait accompli. Like if you're an organization and you're not using sales engagement, like what the hell are you doing? You're
in some industries.
Yeah, but like they're totally, but like it's now at this point it's just kind of like an installation across the rest of the the rest of the market, which is what our sellers are for. Good job, sellers. That's what you are here bringing the good news, right? Of like the fact that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of customers using this thing, and like here, this is like you're not going to get burned. No, nobody ever got fired for adopting a Gartner covered category. But what's ended up happening is a lot of these things are, because these things go better together, right? Because like call recording and kind of the insights that show up in calls can inform what's happening in deals the same way that like, email signals and opens and replies from a sales engagement solution can also inform what's going into a deal, which can inform like whether or not a forecast is valid. All these things go better when lined up together. I'm just kind of curious how, like, you guys have been kind of at the forefront of suiteifying sales engagement, now what I'm calling like digital selling. How's that going? How are customers liking it, et cetera?
Yeah, it's funny, there's always kind of an argument about best of breed or a full solution suite. And we went through that argument for many, many, many years. And mine was always to put them together. And I had board members that said, argued against it. I had executives that argued against it. But at the end of the day, what I realized is that what we do for our customers can make such a big impact on the things that matter the most to them, right?
Yep.
It's these types of solutions really move the number for these companies that we serve,
Sure.
right? And so that's, that's tough to do. And that's very important. I think it was Mark Twain. He was like talking about silver mines. And he was like, the deepest mines are the ones that are the most valuable, but they're harder to dig that deep, and so for my customers, in order to generate double-digit returns on their opportunity sizes and pipeline and close one business, there's work that has to go into that. And there's work from us that's already gone into the solution. There's work from us on the professional services front, and there's work from them to meet us there, so we can make it happen. And so with the amount of work that's necessary on both parties, there are complexities that are part of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you see it with, integrations and implementation timelines and all the fields that you sync across the CRM and all the, API calls and, it's all customer service and solution. Like my customers were getting invited to 5 annual events from their sales vendors, like, you don't need to go to 5 different events, this is the one that stood the test of time. So come to this one, right? But
I like that.
5 CSMs.
Whose parties do you want to go to? That's how
5 CSMs for the sales performance and engagement, and more, right? And so what we anticipated back then was that these companies are going to want a partner that they can do a lot of this work with, and that for us, that these pop up multi-billion-dollar valued, raised a bunch of VC money, companies that are now struggling in a lot of ways. They were point solutions then. And, we recognized them as such then and realized they were going to be part of a bigger platform. So let's move in and either start doing that, acquire a company that does that, or partner with one that does that. And really, the first two tended to be the route that made the most sense because, partnerships are really tough to make work. And so we've invested in becoming a full suite of sales engagement, and it's paid off, and still got work to do, of course. But I think you'll continue to see consolidation across this space. And that's a message that you can't go out in the market and not hear now, which is funny because back then that wasn't the message, kind of pre-ZERP or whatever.
Right. Well, I think a big, as like a software entrepreneur first and like a sales leader second, I tend to think about it from the standpoint of like technology, kind of like innovation, and then kind of like S curves, like asymptoting. And so at a certain point, like, sales engagement was really fantastic because it turned out that like doing automated, follow-up emails to a well-positioned ICP buyer is like a very powerful thing, because like they don't open your first email, right? Yeah. Like maybe they open your second. And so the notion
I prefer to think about it as holding the reps accountable to the actions that they should be taking anyway to communicate effectively with their buyer, right?
Sure. And the first version of that was automated email, which is totally cool, right? And like, but it's not the only
prompt
thing.
Email, not just automated, just prompt email too, automating the prompting so the rep executes on it too.
There was, and that was the very, very, that was the very, very, yeah, and that, and like that was the very, very first version, and then automating it, and then moreover, like layering calling into that, and at a certain point, you kind of get to the point where it's like, man, is there more that we can do here? And it's like, probably not, right?
Yeah, and then gathering more information and sending more signals, and teeing the reps up for the right actions. It is kind of infinite as it relates to that.
Right, but like different than like this kind of the first version of like sales engagement, and the same is true with respect to like, I don't know, call recording, right? At a certain point, it's like, hey man, we like recorded the call, we're getting there habitually, it's getting transcribed, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like thinking about where you're at of the S curve, and so I think with a lot of these categories of like call recording, deal inspection, sales engagement, even forecasting. right?
Yeah.
Like it turns out that like, oh, we have to add up all the values of these ops and like do it at the RSM level and then do it at the RVP level and then do it at the SVP level. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Like at a certain point, you're going to hit the end of the S curve there. And then it makes sense to spend your time consolidating that as opposed to a new point solution. So I think that makes a lot of sense. My question would be, where are we going to see kind of like new categories of stuff that matters kind of pop out versus like the synthesis and the kind of the like
Yeah.
orchestration of these existing things. I mean,
Well,
maybe it's like continuous discovery software, but
yeah,
any
I
kind of
think it is.
any kind of things you've seen there?
Well, I think it is a little bit like that because what we've done is we're just scratching the surface on the inputs we're analyzing to then prompt the company on the right type of communications to their buyers, right? And that has infinite scalability. In what we'll find, sellers of the future will be prompted on how to communicate with their buyers. So that's where you'll see the scale, right? So any job in the world that has any repetitive nature at all to it. I mean, any job in the world at all, the person who's best at that thing, they've got a task list of steps they execute on. They've got a calendar reminding them where to be, and they've got email kind of changing the game plan as it goes, right?
Right.
And so what I'm looking at is, for any profession in the world, of course, for sales first, and that's where, it always starts is, okay, let's take that task list, make it super dynamic where it's being updated without the person having to update it. Make it incredibly actionable where you're not having to take that action and then come back and click to say you took that action. And then analyzing the shit out of what happened when they took it so that you can then feed that over and over and over again. And so those inputs those inputs are infinite. The prompts, there's more finite to the prompt, but it's based on what the input was. But at the end of the day, and this is what, Salesloft Rhythm is that it's a live action list of tasks you need to execute on that are tweaking based on what's happening with your customer and in the world, and that are helping you execute on those tasks and then analyzing the data so it can continue. So I think that's, whether it's call recording or deal inspection or forecast, like all that stuff can happen and then queue up the action list for them to take that step to do the right thing. It doesn't just have to be communicating with customers. It could be between the executive and the rep, and that communications can be monitored and managed there too. So I think you'll see a lot there. I mean, I didn't say the word AI, but AI is embedded all throughout, whatever I just, however that, just represented, because all those data sources and the engine that's turning that into actions. But, sometimes it's AI, sometimes it's not. Most of the time in my history in sales, maybe 100% of the time that people over marketed on AI, they failed. 100% in sales.
Yeah. Well, so I think I'm glad that you brought up the rhythm, because I think that that's like the synthesis and kind of like the orchestration of these signals and behaviors is the I think the thing that we're kind of seeing across these different like buckets of like things that used to be disparate kind of point solutions and what have you. Well, Kyle, this was fantastic. I really appreciate. So in 6 months, when you have the MVP, the minimum viable product of your continuous discovery and collaboration, continuous discovery, living deck, et cetera, software, you're going to come back and give us a demo first.
Present,
Is that right?
Show it live.
Okay, awesome. Well, wonderful. Well, everybody, thank you so much for spending time with Kyle and myself. I mean, I'm sure you learned a lot, just like I did. We're gonna have another great session coming up here in a second, so there's gonna be a quick break, and then come on back and for more Sales Fever. Kyle, thank you very much for your time, and have a great rest of your day. Okay.
You too. See ya.